You'd better be ready. Come on. What did you expect?
G'day guys, welcome back to another special episode here on the Critic Kebab channel. We're going to be doing a full spoiler review for Loki. Season 1, yes, Season 1 just wrapped up. We waited an extra week because I wanted to watch the behind the scenes making of the Loki series. So I have now watched that and I am back in the room with Sam Eastgate. Thank you very much for coming on. We have lots of thoughts about Loki, so let's just dive straight into it. Initial thoughts, what were they?
Overall, I liked it. There was a lot of interesting stuff. A lot of some really good episodes individually. A lot of character dynamics and stuff that I really enjoyed. Action was good. More mixed on some elements, but overall, I'm happy.
I'm very conflicted on the series of Loki. Some of you may remember on Caleb's Conversation podcast, episode 2, that I did with Aiden and Declan, where we discussed a heap of Marvel stuff and all the things that were coming into Phase 4, where we discussed Loki. My prediction for the show was that it was going to be very inconsequential, not be tied into the larger MCU story, and boy, was I wrong. It ties in very heavily because the way the finale leaves us, it's like the universe is we're in a bit of trouble here. So it's going to be interesting to see what the trajectory of Phase 4 will be, not only with the events that happened in WandaVision, but also now that everything's happening in Loki. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness is just going to be even more crazy, I can anticipate.
Yes, Doctor Strange has a lot of messes to clean up. Yeah, it seemed more like this is sort of the leaping off point for Phase 4 and potentially in the future, which I'm sure we'll get into. Again, yeah, like you said, I thought it was going to be sort of more separated, more focused on finally doing a show with Loki, just as Loki, and we're not having to do any of the big interconnected stuff. But like you said, complete opposite of that. Very much the leaping off point for the rest of
Phase
the
4,
MCU
yeah.
for a while,
Yeah.
it seems like. And a lot of good stuff, a lot of stuff wrapped up, but also a lot of stuff that...
Loose threads,
lots of loose threads.
Well, that's the interesting thing that I find with the fact that a Loki show even exists to begin with. Obviously, when the events of Avengers Endgame transpired, there was an accident where Hulk just bumped that, Tesseract out of the hands of Tony Stark, and Loki was able to escape from that. And, that obviously, that event is the Nexus event that kind of leads to the creation of this show. And I was under the impression that once we had that moment in Endgame, I'm like, oh, okay, there's a Loki show coming out. It'll be 2012, Avengers Loki doing evil stuff, because that was back in the timeline when he was kind of evil-centric. And it's going to be a cool show focusing on Loki doing badass things. And then the show starts and he gets captured by the TVA, and then he's like a prisoner for them. And I'm like, oh, okay, so that's not what the show was. So I was like, my initial impression was wrong. And then episode 2 happens, and he becomes like, it almost becomes like a buddy cop detective show with Loki and Mobius. And I was like, oh, okay, so it's going to be like one of those type of shows. And then at the end of episode 2, Loki ends up, pissing off, and he goes off to try and find Sylvie through that portal and stuff. And then they separate. And I'm like, oh, okay, so what is this show? So that was my biggest hurdle for this show, was trying to figure out what actually is this show, because it starts off as one thing, then it becomes another thing, and then by the time we get to episode 3, when the female version of Loki, aka Sylvie, comes into the show, it becomes even more of there's so much more mystery and romance, and there's a lot more themes and stuff that are explored, not just with Loki, the main Loki, but also with all the other versions of Loki as well. So what was your thoughts of where the season started to where it eventually got to at the end?
I'm sort of mostly positive. I remember before the Loki show started, when they announced it, I was very much against the idea of a Loki show. I've mentioned this before, but in Infinity War, there's a couple of characters that die pre-snap. And in my, I guess, ideal world, or in my head, those were the characters whose deaths had to stick. Currently, it's looking like we're 0 for 3.
Well, Heimdall's still dead.
Heimdall's still dead, and I'm not at all scared that he'll be coming back. Or as much as I love Idris Elba,
I think he's done.
To come back. Yeah, he's done.
But no, you're right. Vision is now back to life, and
Sort of.
Loki is kind of back to life as well. So
Yeah. So I was very much against the Loki show. He'd had his arc throughout the entire MCU from Thor in Avengers in that evil phase, and then since then taking that sort of redemption turn, which I loved and is one of my favorite dynamics, him and Thor, and the sort of the journey they come on, and to sort of continue it beyond that felt a little bit cheating almost, sort of undercuts just how important that arc was. As it began, I enjoyed all the episodes and all the sort of the dynamic with Owen Wilson's Mobius. Very fun.
cool character.
Love that character and love their dynamic. That first episode of almost felt like a shrink session between Mobius and Loki. Was very funny, having Mobius just probing, what makes you you? Why do you do these things?
It very much so was a character study that
Yeah,
really went
absolutely.
in depth and looked at who Loki is as not only as a person, but as, the god of mischief and what that means, not only in the, mythology, but also to, Loki as an individual who has this background as a frost giant who was then, taken as a child by Odin and then raised as guardian, and where his kind of place in the universe is. So, yeah, those sort of themes, especially in those early episodes, were really, really interesting.
And those are my favorite elements of the show. That discussion, and then all the stuff with him in that time loop, getting slapped by Sif in the face over and over and over, and sort of the realization that he comes to, you can see in that scene, I guess, and even in towards the end in the void. When it's him and just a ton of other Lokis, and they all sort of, it's again that coming to terms with what it means to be a Loki and all these different places. But although a lot of people talking about the arc that he went on from being 2012 Loki to the end of this series, which in my head still looks identical to the arc that he took on between 2012 Loki and Infinity War, even in that first 10 minutes of Infinity War. But it was good to see it in more of a self-aware way as he sort of comes to terms with...
Evolved.
Yeah, comes to terms. It's almost sort of... He comes to the point where he was in Infinity War, but then he's able to stop and look back and really dive into... his past, all of that sort of, self sort of psychological evaluation that he does. Sort of, why do I do this? And coming to terms with all that.
Why he is evil.
Yeah.
Like, is he truly evil? Because what he does is mischievous, yes, but is it evil? That's where the question raised.
Some of it, I think, would definitely go, that's a little more than mischief.
Yeah, I would agree.
That's borderline YouTube. It's a prank, bro.
Yeah, exactly.
Going, no, it's not. No, that's just bad. But yeah, and I did like a lot of the show. A lot of the Sylvie, another great character. Again, sort of that end scene, which I'm sure we'll dive into more. That sort of you can't trust and I can't be trusted. The sort of dynamic. Like a lot of people, the internet bit mixed on Sylvie Loki romance.
Well, yes. I'll say before we dive into that,
just making out with yourself.
Yes, it's 100% weird. But before we touch on that, I just want to backtrack a little bit and talk about the 2012 Loki. Because it's interesting, like, in the first episode, we established that this is the Avengers 2012 Loki that was doing the bidding of Thanos, and wanting to destroy New York, had these evil motivations because he wanted his own throne. And then he gets thrust into the TVA, and he almost gets like... He does like an MCU watch-along of the Loki story, and he sees like how...
He gets his own Legends episode.
Yeah, exactly. So he like kind of gets it's not really a recap, like a preview of what his story will be. So in that respect, it was kind of the screenwriter's way of like catching Loki up to where we last knew him from. And to add on to what you were saying earlier of like not really liking the idea of bringing Loki back, especially after his character arc in Infinity War, I'm in that same boat because, his character journey from where he was in the first Thor movie of, this, selfish, arrogant, did not like his brother, really wanted the throne for himself and wanted to prove to his father that he was worthy of any sort of acclaim. And then to see how that arc has progressed and his relationship with Thor has grown stronger and stronger. And then by the time we get to Avengers Infinity War, he is willing to sacrifice himself in order to save his brother Thor. So the way that character evolved across the MCU timeline, the sacred timeline, if you will, was really, really enjoyable. So I was in that same bit of like, oh, do we really need to be bringing Loki back? However, the screenwriters definitely could say, all right, well, we had this thing in Endgame. We obviously need to tie this up somehow. And that with the creation of Disney Plus, I think a Loki show was the best suited for that. But the thing that I want to kind of tie this little part of the conversation into a little nice little knot is that this Loki that we currently have in the Loki show is not... It's a new Loki entirely. Would you agree? Because it's like... It's not the 2012 Avengers Loki. It's not the Infinity War Loki that we've gone on this journey with. It's now like it's like a new Loki entirely. So it's weird seeing like how this version of Loki is now reacting to everything that's going on. And yeah, it's weird to see Tom Hiddleston portray this new version of the character that we kind of are familiar with, but not really because he's timeline-wise, it's all a bit screwy. Yeah. Wibbly wobbly, timey-wimey.
It is a slightly alternate version of the Loki that we know.
Did you like Tom Hiddleston's performance across the show? Like, because it's kind of different, but like also very similar.
It is a bit different, but Tom Hiddleston does do a great job as Loki. That's never been my complaint. He is genuinely awesome to watch as Loki. And
he's so captivating. His screen presence is just so... He just commands your attention when he's just, monologuing or trying to, scam you in whatever way. He does such a great job of it. I agree.
Yeah. And we did get to see even more of that almost comedic side towards the end as he becomes less evil and starts being a genuinely happier person, which I think we saw a bit of in Ragnarok, but not as much. And I enjoyed it. I did enjoy Tom Hiddleston. He is good.
Now, you just mentioned previously about the relationship between Loki and Sylvie. And this was a very weird relationship because it's like it's a female version of Loki, but it's like a form of self-love, but it's also heterosexuality. It's very strange. So what was your thoughts on the whole Sylvie Loki relationship and how these characters not only met, but how their relationship evolved?
I wasn't initially weird. It's only weird if you think about it too much.
Well, as Marvel fans, we tend to think about shit too much.
That is true. That is why we're here. But just purely watching it like the first time, if you watching it, they feel like two different characters.
I agree. Yeah,
they have I do like their chemistry and the relationship they build. Initially, I didn't necessarily feel like it was going romantic. It was going more of a Steve Rogers, Natasha Romanoff sort of...
more of a brother-sister type dynamic? Yeah, okay.
Sort of buddy, we can just be friends, really good friends. Which is, I think, the angle that I think I either would prefer or maybe where they'll go in the future if
it continues.
If it continues and if now they have the chance to look back at the internet's reaction. There was a lot of mixed emotions on that. But like I said, they feel like very different characters. So if they do go down that rate, I won't be totally annoyed. I think it would be better if they didn't, but it is what it is. But it is interesting in a Loki sort of helps his own arcs being able to sort of externalize the things that make him a Loki.
A self-reflection.
Loki. It's a self-reflection because it's presented as a different person.
I feel Sylvie is almost used as a vessel for Loki to look at what the best qualities of himself are.
Exactly, yeah.
And I think that's one of the smarter things that the show did was use these other versions of Loki to kind of like level up our version of Loki, if that makes sense.
Yeah, he's sort of the mixing pot of the best parts of Sylvie and the best parts of, I guess our Loki and the best parts of classic Loki, who we saw, and all this sort of stuff, and hopefully we'll forge him into the best Loki, maybe.
Whatever that means.
Whatever that means. But she almost becomes an assistant on his arc as well as having her own.
Because that's really much like when she comes into the story, it's like, okay, who is this mysterious person that we need to find and who's creating all this havoc? And then you learn it's a Loki. And then, by the time we get to the second episode, you can kind of tell there's a feminine energy towards her. And then when it's finally revealed, it's like, oh, okay, we're definitely getting into some multiverse stuff. And obviously, I know you're a huge fan of Doctor Strange, and we're both very eager and excited for Into the Multiverse of Madness.
Yeah.
So, do you think that the stuff that we've been seeing in Loki is going to directly tie into what we will hopefully see in Doctor Strange 2, or do you think there will be a slight disconnect? Because the reason I'm asking you this question is because it's announced, obviously, at the end of the show that there is going to be a season 2 for Loki. So my question is to you again, will this tie up in Doctor Strange, or will this storyline tie up in season 2?
I think probably a bit of both. At this stage, we don't know when season 2 is. I don't know if they've gone into production
which
or
is why
pre-production or anything.
Yeah.
So we don't know. It could be in another year or two. And if
we know that Doctor Strange is going to be May/April of next year.
Exactly. So we know when that is, and it's unlikely, I would say impossible, that season 2 will come before that. So I
agree.
think, and pretty sure I've seen somewhere that Tom Hiddleston is in Multiverse of Madness in some form.
Okay.
And the title and the way that this show ends, it's definitely going to be. The question is how much, which is one of sort of the big drawbacks of the way this show ended, which like I said, I'm sure we'll get into more in a sec. But the way it's definitely going to, if we're looking, it looks like we've just witnessed the birth of the multiverse and Doctor Strange.
In its true form.
And Doctor Strange is in the Multiverse of Madness, which I assume the madness is
the fact that these all these branches
this
and
thing's
stuff.
just suddenly spawned and it's all going to go to chaos like that. And he's going to be trying to fix it. The question is balancing between whatever Wanda's doing and whatever Loki's done and how much Loki himself is in it and how much we're just dealing with the consequences of the end of this show. And then there's Kang and all this that we don't know where they're going. But to answer your question simply, yeah, I think there'll be a reasonable amount of tie-in between this and Doctor Strange. But also, I feel like maybe some of the more personal elements, so like the Loki Sylvie stuff and Mobius, will probably
be reserved for a season 2.
Be reserved for season 2. I don't think we'll get too much of that in Doctor Strange, if at all.
Well, you mentioned the big man himself, Kang. Now, I like how a lot of the Marvel people like to like tease us in this way, where they call the character in the Loki finale the one who remains.
He who remains.
He who remains. And to all us people who are in the know and know what the fuck's going on, Kang soon to be Kang the Conqueror is in the MCU. It's happening. What were your thoughts as soon as he popped up on screen? Because I was very, very surprised because I assume you know this, and many of you at home will also know this, that Jonathan Majors, who plays Kang, was announced to be playing this, Kang in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. And I remember when that was announced by Kevin Feige back at the Disney investors meeting, however long ago, we were all like, that's weird that Kang would be in an Ant-Man movie. But now that he showed up in Loki, it's like, I understand where they're going with this now. And obviously they're very faithful, at least so far, with Kang's origin story. And now that he is deceased, the one who remains is deceased, the possibilities are endless. So what are your thoughts on the introduction of Kang here in Loki?
I thought it was a weird place to introduce him. Like we said before, it felt like at the start this was going to be much more of a closed-off individual show. So to have such a big player being introduced not only in a solo project but in a solo Disney Plus show, I think is potentially a divisive move. I don't have a huge problem. Surprising, but to have someone so big coming into the MCU through a project that maybe will get less, if people who don't have Disney Plus might just skip it. It's a TV show. A lot of people will just stick with the movies, more casual fans. So I was surprised by that. And also, the announcement of Jonathan Majors in Ant-Man and the Wasp, not just he is in it, but to announce it so early, it's an odd choice, I think.
Well, the reason why I think they did that sort of misdirection early on with us is I think they were setting us up for not only this surprise in Loki, but also I think the fact that, when Sylvie murders, the one who remains, or he who remains, that allows the timeline to create these branches which will then inevitably lead to these multiple multiverses. And I think that is going to be the spawning point for multiple versions of Kang showing up in any MCU story. So whether it's Ant-Man, Doctor Strange, the next Avengers movie, if there's ever going to be one. So I think he can show up anywhere now because he is this time-traveling supervillain. And I think this has basically laid the foundation here in Loki, has laid the foundation for this character to basically pop up whenever and for us to be like, okay, I understand why, and now let's go on the journey for it.
Yeah. My initial thoughts were Kang is like a big threat. Kang is, a lot of people have been saying Kang is a suitable candidate to be the next Thanos, the next, decade-long villain. So to have him introduced so strongly, so early, if you compare it to Thanos, we got 5 seconds. It took us 5 years to see just one side of his purple mug.
Yes.
For 2 seconds. And we didn't properly get him for ages after that. So to have him introduced so early, initially I was sort of, what's this going to be? Are you sort of rushing into it rather than building it like they did with the Infinity Saga? But the idea of multiple Kangs lends itself to that. So you might have a less threatening version in Ant-Man and the Wasp, and maybe, like you said, pop up in a few other places. But I think it's going to hopefully lead to maybe in a couple of Avengers movies or the next one, to him being the next Thanos, the big phase, not even phase ending, saga ending villain, because he is that level of threat, and the number of different forms he's taken, some of which he sort of hinted at in his monologue. I think he said, "I've been called
many names,
a ruler, a conqueror."
Yeah, I love those little Easter eggs that they throw in there.
It's like, yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how much they borrow from the comics, because he's got a lot of tie-ins in the comics.
A lot of weird shit as well in the comics. So it'll be interesting to see what they pick and choose and what they keep and what they don't.
Yeah, because there's been a lot of discussion about the different versions, and now he warned us that they're all coming. So there'll be one that's a big threat, I assume. That'll be Kang.
The blue version?
The blue version, hopefully blue. I think that'd be cool.
It depends on how. See, this is the weird thing with the Marvel universe is they've done so much crazy, wacky shit. We got Mysterio in the MCU.
Yeah, we got Fishbowl.
If we can get fucking the Fishbowl in the MCU, we can get
blue
anything.
Skin, purple.
So I think the possibility is out there. And what excites me most is that in the finale, Jonathan Majors played this character in a very flamboyant and interested, because he has known the flow of time and what's about to happen his entire life. And that moment where they cross the threshold, and he doesn't know what's going to happen. Just the way he performed that and that sort of transition was awesome. So I really liked his performance here. But what excites me even more is to see Jonathan Majors play this same character, but with a really menacing, evil spin on it.
Oh,
because
absolutely,
that I think will be really, really cool.
That will be impressive, and I like the different versions. So in my head, I've been calling this version Immortus, which is, for those who don't know, Immortus is one version of Kang much further in the future when he's older, which seems to be the sort of vibe. He's like the more passive.
The overseer.
The overseer who's not sort of meddling and conquering and stuff. He's just sort of trying to protect it. Sort of more benevolent, bit shifty, but well-intentioned. And to see what versions we get, how many we get, and potential tie into Fantastic Four if we get there.
True, he could show up there as well. Because, in the comics, Kang and Fantastic Four tie into each other very much so.
He is, in the comics, he is a descendant of Reed Richards.
Yeah, well, I don't think they'll do that for the MCU,
do that
just because I think that's too confusing.
And too soon. You have to wait until Reed Richards has been established to bring that in.
Yeah. I don't think they'll do that. But again, that's just one of those weird, crazy things that comics have done.
It's just more pointing to
their eventual introduction.
Oh, they're coming. Yeah. They're coming. And there should be a connection.
So hyped. Oh, it's going to be awesome.
And I think, they didn't set this one up to be as much of a surprise as people were thinking. To those who sort of know, and I'm not a huge comic reader, I read about them a lot. So I've seen a lot of videos like Renslayer has been linked to Kang in the comics. And there was a bunch of Easter eggs in that Journey into Mystery episode, a couple of different references to Kang that I've since heard about. So I don't think this wasn't a twist villain. I think they were very much setting it up.
Well, even like what Thanos is like, right? Because in the comics, he has a very specific Infinity Saga story. And this is what I think the MCU does so well, is they adapt and cherry pick the best parts from the comics and then put their own movie spin on it.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think it works really, really effectively. And then there's little things here and there. A recent example being the sort of revelation in Black Widow that doesn't sometimes hit the landing, but for the most part they take the right stuff and they bring it into the MCU and really simplify it and make it work in a really compelling way. I think Mysterio was a great example of that, because everyone coming into that movie was like, well, we know Mysterio's a bad guy. But everything up to that point was portraying him as this savior character that worked with Peter Parker. And then obviously the revelation with him being an actual bad guy was fantastic. So they do some really great stuff, but that's one of the things that obviously the MCU has to its advantage, is they have this long history of stories that they can pull from. And when they have that at their disposal, it makes things so much easier from a storyteller's perspective.
Yeah, they sit in the perfect sort of Goldilocks zone of they're telling their own story. So there's a lot of talk of, doing certain things from the comics because it's really important in the comics. And my point is always that we're so far removed from the comics at this point that they're not really a fair comparison.
Yeah, it's never going to be like Harry Potter, the direct book to film adaptation. It's not going to be like that. It's going to be a cherry picking situation.
Yeah, so they can pick what they want. And now that they have this established reality, they can pick what they want and that fits, rewrite it to fit into this established continuity that they've got now that they've got that there. But it's always, like I said, it's always good to, for people who knew, they could see it coming and they didn't try and play it off as any twist or anything like that. But to people who don't, they'll have it in the future because they didn't actually say Kang or anything like that in the episode. We never got a name for him. So for the more casual audiences, they can discover that as they go, as these play out.
Exactly.
So, sort of playing both sides and doing it really well, I think, so far.
My next question to you now is, what were your thoughts on the TVA as a whole? Because they were an interesting organization, the Time Variance Authority, obviously coming from the comics, now bringing them into the MCU. And then we have this idea of, these, gatekeepers of the timeline and all this sort of, very supernatural stuff. When the TVA came into it, what were your thoughts not only as them as an organization and the characters within it, but also aesthetically? What do you think of the TVA?
I thought it was a fun aesthetic, the sort of brown 70s, 80s sort of coats and all that.
I thought it was really
cool.
interesting.
It was a bit weird, but I thought it was really cool. Looked kind of fun. I didn't know anything about the TVA before this show. I heard about it. The first I ever heard about it was like the first trailer, and then you watch breakdowns and like this thing from the comics. So I didn't have any prior knowledge. I did enjoy sort of the way it worked, particularly characters like Renslayer. That sort of we never really knew where her motivation was, and we still don't. Last we saw her, she was like, I'm off to find free will. She walked through a door.
Whatever the fuck that means.
I have no idea where she was. That leads me into my initial thing. I wasn't very happy with the whole sacred timeline idea to start off with. Purely for the sort of thematic removal of free will from everything we've seen before. I think all these, Tony Stark snap and all these sort of heroic moments that endear these characters as heroes. The sort of taking of the agency behind them, I wasn't particularly happy about initially. Sort of essayed by the speech from He Who Remains, Immortus Kang, whatever we're going to call him, at the end there, the sort of way it made it sound less like they were being controlled, you did forward your steps, and more like he had already seen it happen, but he didn't
interfere.
He didn't interfere. He watched it happen and got rid of the outside ones. Also some sort of less solid on exactly how the sacred timeline works, as opposed to the multiverse. So there's
let's jump on that, because I think they're two very distinct things. I think the sacred timeline exists in every multiverse. So there's infinite multiverses, and there is a one singular timeline within that multiverse. And I think that's where the confusion comes in of like, well, how are the Avengers able to travel back in time and follow all these rules of the quantum realm and all this sort of time travel stuff that they set up in Endgame? It's because they're going into a different multiverse that has a different timeline, because obviously the sacred timeline has the events and the stories that we've seen transpire over the 23 films or whatever we've had so far. And that has all happened in this one timeline. And then when the Avengers travel back in time, they weren't traveling along this timeline that we've seen in the movies. They've traveled to an adjacent timeline. Like, how they see in the TVA all those splinter ones? Yeah. They've traveled to one of those splinter ones, got what they needed, come back to the main timeline, then return them to the splinter timeline, and then the sacred timeline continues from there. That's why in the TVA, and I'm actually interested to hear your thoughts on this, how they just have like a fuckload of Infinity Stones just lying around. It's like paperweights and shit. It's because they're all from those, all other universes and stuff and other timelines and stuff. And they're just like, oh, we don't need this anymore. Very similar to how Loki in his, splinter timeline gets the Tesseract to escape. It's like, well, that wasn't supposed to happen. Oh, well, we'll just keep this now.
Yeah, and it's like, well, now that we've got this cube.
Yeah.
There was sort of a purely on the multiverse stuff. It was sort of how we portrayed it at the end was there's a multiverse war, and I wasn't certain whether it was he'd used Eliath to destroy the connections or just isolate. So it's like all the multiverse is still out there, but they can't access us. So He Who Remains didn't destroy everything, he just cut the bridges. So it's like, here's the sacred timeline. The multiverse is out there, but they can't access us. And now that he's gone, those branches
Don't exist.
Those branches can connect to the multiverse, and now we're in there.
And it's obviously interesting for us too as fans and the global community who kind of break this stuff down and try and understand it. I think we will get a concrete explanation of this all in Doctor Strange 2 because there's so much like confusion and people aren't exactly sure what's going on with the multiverses and this timeline stuff. Doctor Strange, he knows shit. So he's going to come in and not only will he fix stuff, but he'll explain it to us, the audience, as well. And so I feel like a lot of our questions will be answered in time.
Yeah.
We just have to be a bit patient. There's a reason that movie is called The Multiverse of Madness.
And it is going to be a hell of a movie. It's got a lot of lifting to do.
Oh, yeah. Especially after what WandaVision has set up.
Yeah,
and
we'd
now
already
what
seen.
what Loki has set up.
It's Doctor Strange 2, and then WandaVision, it was like, oh, and they're also continuing the WandaVision. And now Loki's dumped this whole extra. That movie's going to be
insane.
It's going to be a lot. And the more you think about it, the more it's like, oh, that's a lot to do in one movie.
Kevin Feige, we trust.
In Feige, we trust. I'm not scared. It's Raimi, and I love Doctor Strange.
Yeah, it's got to love Sam Raimi at the helm.
It'll be good, but it is going to be a big movie. And there's going to be a lot happening. So I wonder where the singular story thread they're going to follow in the madness.
Yes.
I'll be very interested.
The one thing I just want to quickly add from the TVA that I remember hearing in the making of assembled documentary of the show is that they said that part of the set design of the TVA is they have all these like circular lights on the roofs and stuff, and they say that the way that they're shaped with the light bulb in the middle and then the big light around them is like shaped like an eyeball, and it aesthetically looks like a bunch of eyeballs looking down on you, which I thought was very, very clever because obviously as the sacred protectors of this timeline, they're looking down over everything. So aesthetically, I thought that was quite interesting. But yeah, the browns and the oranges and this kind of weird 70s, 80s aesthetic for the TVA, I think it's cool and I kind of like it, but it's also really strange that a bunch of humans are operating off this old, ancient, wacky technology in this sort of like omnipotent, futuristic, overseeing. It's kind of weird.
You're the ultimate power in the universe. You have access to all times.
And you have like a bunch of 80s computers and shit.
You went with the dodgy interior decorating of the 70s.
Yeah.
Really?
So that's one of those things I'm like, story-wise, I don't fully understand why, especially when we know like Kang is involved with the creation of the TVA and he comes from the 31st century. So it's like, I don't know. That was one of the things I was slightly confused on.
Maybe it makes a resurgence in the 31st century.
Maybe. Exactly. In the 31st century, they have a bunch of 21st century nostalgia. That's what it is.
Yeah, it is.
So, yeah.
Like we do now for like the 80s and 90s and whatnot.
Exactly.
Other question, which I don't think will be touched on in Doctor Strange too much and is probably being saved for season 2. Where's Loki? He's in some alternate dimension somewhere with a Mobius that doesn't know who the hell he is.
It's a good question.
And a statue of Kang where
I think a version of Kang has already come in and
or it's an alternate reality where Kang
was more tyrannical.
Or just got rid of the pretense of the timekeepers and just cut out the middleman and was like, I'm Kang, I run the TVA. It works the same, but instead of it, you're listening to
He wants the fame and notoriety.
Instead of hiding behind the 3 lizard robots, he's doing it himself.
Yeah, I don't know. I think again I think that'll definitely be a season 2 thing. But yeah, I think definitely ties into the fact that he's now in an alternate timeline / alternate universe. So
interesting. And where's Sylvie? Is she still? What happens to that the manor at the end of time, the Citadel, that's what it was called, the Citadel at the end of time. What happens to that when the multiverse splits?
It's a good question. Because, yeah, where does the future happen there? I don't know. Does it just keep rolling on or does it stop? She'll definitely pop up and play an important role in season
Can she
2,
just
I think.
like pick a universe to go to if she's like
don't
outside
know.
of it all at the moment?
Dude, we're getting into some real Doctor Who crazy shit now. It's what I like about this show is that it's kind of like Doctor Who and Rick and Morty with Loki at the helm. That's kind of what this show is in a weird way.
Yeah, but it does lead to the more negative side that I had with.
Yes,
the
well, let's
end of
dive
Loki.
into some of the negatives. What were some of the issues that you had with the show? Because I had a few things that I was a bit, that I had my issues with. So yeah, what were the things that really kind of grinded your gears?
Well, we've already touched on my sort of disapproval of the whole show's existence in the first place.
Oh, well, of course, yeah.
So getting past that and the whole sacred timeline free will issue, I think I enjoyed it once you look past those sort of, with those in mind. I think my main complaint was the way the show ended sort of didn't feel like an ending, which is what it, sort of it sort of hinted at before with sort of just leading into everything else. It was less of a, here's the show, watch the show, and finish the show. It was more...
This is the end of season 1.
Yeah.
Tune in next time.
Even the whole last episode felt very much like, now we're going to Doctor Strange. Hope you're on board because we're going there. And season 2, it felt like there was very little that was actually fully wrapped up.
Yeah.
Which was sort of disappointing.
The issue I had with the finale was not so much that it was left open-ended, because I think in this MCU world that we live in, there's a lot of story threads that are left open that we will explore in later stories. The thing that annoyed me most about the finale was just the pacing and the fact that we have these two specific storylines going. The scenes with Mobius and the Judge Renslayer, and Loki, Sylvie, and Kang. Like, we have those two distinct scenes that happen in the finale, and every time we cut back to the scenes with Mobius and stuff, I was just like, I don't give a fuck what's going on here. Just take me back there. I want to hear what Kang has to say, because that shit was interesting. So that was my biggest problem with the finale, was the fact that it just, every time we cut back to them in the TVA, I just felt like the story just grinded to a halt, because I was like, let's just get back to the interesting shit.
Yeah, they did really well with, because that last episode was mostly
sitting down, dialogue, heavy stuff. Yeah.
an exposition dump. But to keep that engaging and really interesting, they did well. I feel like the Mobius story not much happened, which is sort of, I guess,
getting
your
set
point.
up for season 2.
It just sort of, he left the void at the end of the last episode going, what are you going to do? Burn it down. And he sort of didn't do much. He walked in, had a conversation with Renslayer, and she pushed him over and walked away. That was it. And he sort of, I wanted to see more of him. And I wanted to see the resolution of him going to the TVA and burning it down, just going around trashing. We got a little bit of him and, is it B-15? The one that Sylvie...
The security lady.
The security lady that we first met, and who Sylvie had sort of enlightened with them going to a school, which we got the pen. And seeing the alternate version of Renslayer. But other than that, we didn't really get much. I would have liked to see more action from that side of the story, which sort of is your point, that sort of stopped and did nothing. I did like that conversation, though. I did enjoy...
Yeah, I just felt it was misplaced. Like, it didn't feel necessary for a finale. Like, they either should have left that stuff for the season 2, or you deal with that in a previous episode, because it just felt...
Or you do that all at the start of the episode before Loki comes in. Because that conversation was very... I did like that sort of, we've been friends for so long, who betrayed who, they're both sort of... And we don't really know where Renslayer sits in all this yet. So I did enjoy that conversation, but I do agree that part of that sort of subplot was very slow and didn't really do much.
Any other issues that really stood out to you?
Not overall, to be honest. As purely looking at it independently, it was a really good show. I think my favorite episode would be the 5th one. Love some Richard E. Grant pulling some massive.
Yes.
That scene is so awesome.
It is, yeah.
I wonder if we'll ever see him again. They seemed, him and Kid Loki and Alligator Loki, love that, seemed content to stay in the Void, so we don't know what happens to the Void. Maybe they'll show up again.
I doubt it.
Yeah.
Maybe in a season 2, but I doubt it.
Yeah. It's disappointing, though, particularly the Richard E. Grant. I love Richard E. Grant, and he was awesome.
Yeah, seeing that classic comic booky suit, very similar to what we got in WandaVision with regards to Wanda and Vision wearing their classic comic book suits. Loki found its way to do its version of that.
So stupid.
And I absolutely love it. Richard E. Grant was a great choice to play classic Loki.
Yeah.
And that outfit looks so ridiculous,
It's so
so dumb, but I love it.
I love that we
It's
got to
just so
see it,
awesome.
and now we can go, okay, yeah, let's go back to the normal stuff. I did actually really like that story, seeing, again, like you said, the sort of the pulling of different versions. Now we've seen a Loki that
lived past the Thanos encounter.
and became, he also has been on his own sort of arc and become a good guy in the sort of, in the Void, sort of become depressed. Look at us Lokis, all stabbing each other, President Loki, which is an image that we got a lot of in the promotional stuff and didn't turn into much. But I did enjoy that scene of all the Lokis just stabbing each other in the back the whole time.
Yeah, that was a fun sequence.
That's what happens when you get 2012 Lokis in a room together.
Exactly.
But I do like the sort of hint that maybe Loki's were more powerful than we realize.
Well, it goes back to that idea of what we were talking about at the beginning of this discussion, was that all of these other Lokis that we encounter are a catalyst for our Loki to power
Become
up.
better, yeah. So not just become a better person, but become more powerful. I'm looking forward to seeing that. And it does work as the comic version, because comics are always more insane with their power levels.
100%. The biggest things that kind of stood out to me as I was watching week to week was the fact that I just didn't really know, for the longest time, I didn't really know or understand what the show was. And again, when watching the making of documentary, the showrunner and the writers and stuff, they talk about how with this show, so they wanted to completely divert away from what people would expect from this show, this sort of like quantum leap Loki time travel show. And for me, I understand why they did that, but it was just, sometimes I was just trying to get my footing and grasp of what this show is all about. And I feel like because this has a season 2, coming soon, there might be an evolution and a smoothing out of the kind of the tone and overall themes of what the show is. But that was just my biggest thing week to week. I was like, I don't really know what the show is yet. Whereas WandaVision, I knew exactly what that was. Falcon and the Winter Soldier, I knew exactly what that was. And but yeah, and the story itself, again, I think we're in the exact same mindset of I don't think this show needed to exist, with the fact that we already had a complete story with the Loki that we saw in Infinity War. In saying it was still a fun ride, and I was definitely very wrong with the fact that this ties in not only directly to the overall MCU story, but diving into the last thing that we will discuss is the fact that it ties directly into What If, the animated show, which I did not expect at all, because I think we're all in the mindset of like, okay, this is an animated show. It's taking a scene or sequence from the movies that we've seen over the MCU, spinning it off in one weird, wacky way and saying, what if this happened? And then just telling a fun show in animation form. And what the finale of Loki kind of sets up is that, all these branched realities that we see, spawning, I feel like will be the examples of these episodes in the What If series. And that, I think, was quite clever. And now I'm even more excited for What If, because I was already super hyped just to see all the cool directions that they would take these cool stories. and I like the animation for what I've seen so far. And so I thought that was a kind of a cool twist that they added at the end of season 1 of Loki.
Yeah, What If has been the show that I've been looking forward to the most out of all of them since all of them were announced. Having it.
It's no mistake that What If is the next Disney Plus show.
Yes. And also no mistake that we've already been confirmed to season 2 for What If. They announced that probably a couple of months ago at this point. Like you said, I think I love the way these shows work with the week-to-week thing. Just as a part of my week, I get to watch a Marvel thing every week. I think Loki benefits, like you said, it was sort of unclear exactly what it was. I feel like it works as a show that you just watch and sit with the episode that you've watched and just go, I enjoyed that. I wonder what's happening next. And then you wait a week and it continues.
Interesting that you would say that. I think it might be better if you binged it, honestly.
It might be. Maybe.
Because WandaVision, I felt like really felt the effects of the week to week, where you kind of had to speculate and figure out what was going to happen next. Whereas Loki, I feel like if you binged this show, I feel that would be a better way to watch it, honestly.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I haven't done much binging in my life, so I don't really...
Fair enough.
I don't do a whole lot of, binging. I enjoy the week-to-week thing. I just feel like, the show is designed to... You watch it and enjoy the episode, which is probably why it might have felt sort of disjointed and unclear what it was. As we're trying to connect it all at once, instead of just enjoying each episode as it comes. I understand what you're saying, and I do agree in a way. I'm just saying I really enjoyed it.
That's fair.
I thought it was the sort of once you realize that none of my expectations and stuff were happening, you sort of just file that away and just go, well, clearly I don't know what I'm watching. How about I just watch it?
Exactly. As all people should, because expectations are
a killer.
The catalyst for disappointment. Anyway, I think what I'll cap this conversation off with is the fact that I am genuinely surprised on how much people love this character and the support that he receives. Loki, Tom Hiddleston, who plays him, does such an excellent job. And one of the things I was surprised by, Rotten Tomatoes did a poll recently where they got people to vote on who the best Marvel villain was in like sort of a knockout sort of system.
Yeah.
And obviously, as most would expect, Loki made it all the way, as did Thanos, the big bad of the Infinity Saga. But to my surprise, Thanos did not win, and Loki won the vote by the people, by the fans, as the best villain in the MCU to date. And I've always loved Loki, but he's never been one of my favorite characters in the MCU. But to so many people, he is a great source of entertainment, and I think Tom Hiddleston brings so much love and care and dedication to this role. And to see him carry that on in TV format, I thought was pretty cool. So,
and I think I read it. He'd said in an interview, he will play Loki forever if they let him. So we can look forward to more stuff. I feel like Loki's a fan favorite character. We knew this.
Keep talking.
The idea of him being the best villain is sort of dubious because I feel like, as I said, at this stage, he's no longer a villain. But I'm not surprised that he came out as a fan favorite character. To casual viewers, he's charismatic, and Tom Hiddleston is awesome. So that doesn't surprise me. I am a little surprised at the sort of popularity of this show compared to the other two.
Me too. Yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of hard to read. I feel like this has done the most
Viewership.
Mm-hmm. But it'll be interesting to question sort of how much of that is people enjoyed the show more.
As the set starts to fall around us.
I think we're running out of time.
Yes, we are.
And how much of that is the fact that it's the latest show and people have started to realize sort of how how these shows are working and what to expect. So they're sort of tuning in more as they sort of build and see if they keep building. As to where it fits in my ranking, I think I'll need to sit with it a little bit longer. But I certainly didn't not enjoy it. I'm not disappointed and excited for the future.
Yep. Loki was definitely a show that took us on a wild roller coaster through time and reality and space. I think it was a beautiful show to look at. Aesthetically, it was really, really good. Just the quality of these shows is fantastic. The story itself was definitely intriguing each week that it came out. There were still little things here and there that you could definitely nitpick and pick apart and question the logic of. But overall, I think it sets a foundation for the MCU moving forward that is definitely pivotal to the larger story. And I am excited to see what Tom Hiddleston does next as this character, because he is fantastic, and the possibilities now, after the inclusion of Kang, are endless. So, yeah, I think we'll leave it there, Sam, as the set starts to fall around us. Anyway, thank you very much for watching this spoiler-filled review, however long it is, and I hope you've enjoyed it watching wherever you are around the world. If you are new to the channel, make sure you are subscribed so that you don't miss out on more content like this, more movie reviews, and of course, more of Caleb's Conversation podcast. More episodes of that are coming soon. So yeah, stay tuned for it all. And yeah, I will catch you in another video.